For this tutorial, the first thing I want to start off with is talking about the different errors and mistakes that I've seen you guys making as I walk around class. First thing is, when you set up your layout, make sure that you have the console window handy. If you don't have this open, all you need to do is go up into Window and then scroll down to Console and then place that wherever you want. You basically want this to be handy because as we're going through and coding different things in our scripts, you're going to want to be able to see what those errors are and fix them. Maybe sometimes you've moved objects and haven't connected things appropriately or added the components to the right objects. For example, a lot of people are forgetting to add the game controller script to the game object. Things like that we want to check for. When you do type in scripts, if you want any of this code to be run, you do need to attach it to at least one game object in your scene. So this code is not going to be run unless it's attached to something. Make sure that you have done that step. The next thing is when you guys are moving objects around the scene, a lot of you guys are trying to select objects. Sometimes when you're in the wrong window, you're in the game window here. If I try to select objects, it's not going to work because this is what the player is actually going to be looking at. We actually cannot move objects in this view. So if you go into scene view and then try and click on your object, you'll notice that the inspector and the gizmo pops up, so now you can move the objects around. The next mistake I've been seeing that's been popping up is when you guys go to create new scripts. So if I go to my scripts folder and create a new script, notice how it pops in this blue highlight right here. I can rename it right off the bat. You want to do that, but some of you have been forgetting to do that and you just click somewhere else and it creates the new script. Notice the name of the script, and then it actually shows a preview of the script here, and the name of the class is the same thing, new behavior script. If you double click on it to edit it, and as we've been going through and talking about the code and what you need to type in, some of you have been changing this code up here, or the name of the class, and then saving it, which is okay, but we need to make sure that the name of the script matches the class of the script, because if we don't, then we get an error. As I try to attach it to one of the walls in my scene, we get this error. The script's file name does not match the name of the class defined in the script. So that is the error that shows that this script needs to have the same name as the class. So now if I change it, and we now have the same script name as the player name, and I add it in here, it'll allow me to attach it to the wall. Now I just made that script, so I'm just going to remove it because we don't need that. That was just an example. As we are coding and you guys are looking for errors, there are three things that you're checking to make sure happen. When we start a new script or a new class, we got to make sure that we have these opening and closing squiggly brackets. So here, when I click next to it, notice it highlights another one. That doesn't mean it's an error, that just is a visual showing where it starts and where it ends. So we need an opening and a closing bracket for the entire class. And then we also need an opening and closing bracket anytime we use a new method. So we give the method name, normally with a void in front, and then the name, and then a set of parentheses. After that, we get our opening and closing squiggly brackets. All right, so that's one thing that I see you guys missing a lot. Also, with code here, I know we didn't do it in Visual Basic because it wasn't needed, but in C# we need to make sure nearly every line of code ends with a semicolon after every statement. And lastly is the capitalization. When I was going back through and looking at some of your code, for example, some of you had a start method that started with a lowercase s. Unity doesn't actually look for the start method that starts with a lowercase s. So you would get some errors because this code actually wasn't being run. When Unity looks for a start method, it has a capital S. So start with a capital S is a very different method than start with a lowercase s. So again, looking for capitalization definitely makes a difference. Another example down here when we did destroy game object with a lowercase g is a reference to the game object the script is attached to, in this case the collectible. But if we put in here a capital G, notice it turns blue. This is specifying some type of game object in the scene, basically creating a new variable for that object, where we don't want to create a new variable, we just want to select the game object itself. So we use a lowercase g. Just two instances to show you that capitalization does matter. One more thing I want you guys to do is to go through your 3 scripts and make comments for each line of code. I want you to see if you can understand what each line of code is doing, and then I will go through and show you what my comments look like. Starting with the game controller script, this is what my comments look like. Feel free to pause the video and look at these scripts. Here's my player controller and my collectible controller. Always make sure that you keep up to date on your comments just to make it nice and organized and you can follow where we're going in this game. Now I know we were going to go through and talk about some different ways for the player to win the game, but I think this would be best shown as we create new levels in this game and get new level designs in. But before we even do that, we want to set up our splash screens so we can have a start screen. The player can maybe change some options, go into a level select screen, and then select a level instead of starting right into the game, as most games don't do that. Before we start that, I want to show you guys some more personalization and creativity that you guys can use. Instead of just using these bland colored textures for your different objects, there are ways to import your own textures, and that means the use of Adobe Photoshop. So for example, maybe we didn't want a solid green color for our floor. Maybe we want to texturize it a little bit. We can import our own JPEG or type of picture. Let's just set Unity aside for right now and go ahead and open up Adobe Photoshop. If it's not on your desktop, okay, this is what the icon looks like. If it's not on your desktop, go into your Start menu and look through your programs. All right, once you get it open, it doesn't matter whether it's the 32-bit or the 64-bit version. And I'm going to show you guys how to create a texture real quick. So we go into File, New. Doesn't matter the width and the height. I'm just going to keep it pretty much uniform, 200 by 200 pixels. I increase the resolution a little bit and make sure that your background contents is transparent. All right. It doesn't matter the name, we'll save it later. Hit OK. And just to zoom in real quick, I'm going to hit hold down Control 0, and that just zooms in so it fits the window. Makes it look nicer. Just to give a new grass type of texture, we're going to use some of these tools on the left-hand side. If you're not familiar with Adobe Photoshop, I'll go through and talk about these. You can always hold your cursor over one of the tools and it shows you exactly what it is as well. So we're going to select the paint bucket, and I want to choose some type of green just as a base color. So I just click and we got a green color. I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer because I don't want these all to be on the same layer. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New Layer. It's going to ask me what I want to call it. I don't care. Just Layer 2. You can name it if you want. Alright, we'll use the paintbrush tool if I can find it. Oh, right here. And brush tool, you can use a pencil which is just 1 pixel. I'm going to use the brush. I'm going to go up here. We can change our brush type. You have all these different types. I'm going to pick one where it's kind of sporadic. So maybe this 24 looking one right here. I'm going to increase the size a little bit. You can always get a preview of what the size looks like as you bring it over to the right. And what I'm going to do is try and make this look like terrain as you're looking at a bird's eye view or an aerial view straight down. So I'm going to put in some darker grass. So for right now I'm going to do normal. I'll increase my flow a little bit. And I'll change the color to a little bit darker green. And I'll go ahead and spray it in. Alright, right now it kind of looks like spray paint. That's not really the effect I wanted. I wanted it to be pretty pixelized. So what I'm going to do is hold down Control and Alt and then hit Z. And just hit Z however many times to undo. Because what I actually wanted to be is a little pixelized, so I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to Dissolve. And these are the different types of brushes you can have. So when I hit Dissolve, and now when I click, I get this pixelized look. Alright, and you can press wherever you want to. I'm actually going to, yeah, that was a bad idea. Alright, I will go ahead and go through and click. Okay, and again, you can increase the flow. Maybe this will make it go a little quicker. That looks good. Got some more darker pixels on there. I'm just going to go through. Kind of looks like some different grass. And you can put in as much as you want. And now if you want to create a new layer and do the same thing with a different color, feel free to do that. However, I'm kind of lazy and I don't feel like making all those clicks again. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the layer that's already here. And I have my new layer. And I'm going to double click, which is going to open up this properties or layer style box. And what I'm basically going to do is just change the color overlay. And what that's going to do is change the color of all the different pixels on that texture. And I can change whatever color I want. So I'm going to make them a little brownish. Maybe we got some dead grass, so maybe something like that. There you go. That looks good. Now it's covering up layer 2, so don't freak out right now. You didn't lose all that. But all you have to do is then grab this layer and move it over. Notice it looks exactly like the layer that was already there. And now I'm just going to move it over a little bit, something like that. And I'm going to duplicate it again because I'm going to use the other half for the other half of the texture. So something like that. Alright, maybe you want the darker grass to be on top, so in this layers property here, just grab that layer and bring it to the top. If there's not enough dark grass, feel free to duplicate that layer and move it around again. Which actually, that looks a little bit better. I want the darker grass to show more than the lighter grass. I'm going to use this layer, bring it over here. And that looks really good. So now you can see we have some texture. And if it's still not in the right position, feel free to duplicate these as much as you need to. And for example, I'm going to bring it down here. I have a lot of empty green space, this background color. So I'm just going to duplicate that and bring it in so we don't see that much more. There we go. And you can do this with as many colors as you want. So maybe I'll duplicate these two, and then I'll change the properties on both of them and give it some really dead grass. Alright, that's still not dark enough. Something like that. It's a little too dark. Nope, no, I messed it up completely. There we go. That's what I was looking for right there. Kind of like camo. Alright, so I've created this property, or layer style rather. I'm going to copy the layer style from what I just put on, and I'm going to duplicate it to this layer. So paste layer style. There we go. And now we have these two layers. Ooh, that's kind of trippy. Alright, there we go. Perfect. Bring these two layers down so they're towards the bottom. There we go. Now we have more alive grass than we have dead grass. Alright, so that's my texture. We'll leave it at that. If you want to make more changes, feel free to do that. I'm going to go up to File, Save As. And what's nice about Unity is it actually takes or accepts Photoshop files. Make sure that you save your file in the correct directory. So we want to go to Libraries, Documents, and there should be your game listed here. We called it Rollerball, so there's mine. If you have trouble finding your file, you can always do a search and going through your own documents in your folder and finding it that way. But I'm going to go in here. You should see your assets folder that we already created. And right now we don't have a folder in here for textures, we just have one for materials. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll create a folder for textures. And then inside of my textures, I'm going to go ahead and save it. So I'm going to call this my grass. It'll save. The asterisk goes away in the top left, which means that it's saved. So I'm just going to minimize this, we might need it later. Go back into Unity. Let it compile for a minute. You should see that textures folder pop in here that we've created. Click on there, and there's your grass. Alright, to go ahead and create it or attach it as a material, let's go ahead and make a new material in the materials folder. Create material, we'll call this my grass. And notice how it has a texture box here in the top right hand corner. We're just going to grab that texture and bring it in there. Alright, the tiling, you can increase how pixelized it looks. We might need to change that later once we apply it. So I'm going to click on my grass material and I'll apply it. That looks pretty good. Right, still kind of pixelated. What we can do is increase the tiling. So maybe I'll change it to 3 and 3. Notice how the texture got much smaller and it just repeats when it gets to the end. So it doesn't look super nice. I did it kind of hastily. You can see that there's a green line going through here. So if I wanted to make this look perfect, I'd clear that up in Adobe. So what you're seeing there is this kind of green background on both sides put together, which makes that green line. Again, not the best way to do it, but it'll work. Again, if you tile it even more, 10 by 10, okay, now you really get to see that repeating texture when it looks really bad now. Okay, you can definitely see that the ground's repeating. Alright, so maybe try 2 and 2. Won't be too bad. There you go. Now it kind of looks like the path's going with the bridge, and it was meant to be like that. Alright, I'll leave it like that. So that's how you create a texture and import it into Unity. If you can't create your own folder and import it every time, you can just right-click on your textures, go to Import New Asset, and then find your image that way. So we can go into Pictures. These are all textures that I've created before. Maybe I want to go in and open up my mana bar. So I can import that, and this was just a blue box. Okay, and then you can do it that way. So right-click, Import New Asset, and then select your Photoshop image. Get rid of that. What's also cool about materials is that not only do they display textures, but they can also kind of make the object look a little bit more 3D. For example, we can go up into the material and go into bumped diffuse right at the top. Bump diffuse. Notice it adds in what's called a normal map. A normal map allows the texture to look more 3D. It looks like it has depth. So what we can do is actually resave this as MyGrass normal map and call it normal. I'll save that. It's still in my textures folder, so when I come back here I have this one. So the reason I needed another one is because this is going to be my texture and this one is going to be my normal map. So up here I'm going to go up to Texture Type, Normal Map. And we can leave the rest of it alone. Notice it has a bumpiness. We can play with that later, or you can. I'm going to hit Apply, and don't freak out, but it's going to change this to blue and purple and whatever. Notice how it looks like a blue and purple aerial image, and you can see that it has some depth to it. What we're actually going to do is add this into our grass material. So if I click on my grass material, go into my textures, drag this normal into here, notice how the grass now looks like it has some type of shadow or 3D effect. Makes it stand out much more. Well, in some games this is really a nice feature. It makes it look super realistic or have the style that you want to have. But in this game, since it's pretty cartoony, this texture actually kind of distracts from the rest of the objects in the scene. What I'm going to do is turn this back to diffuse, but if you like it like that, feel free to leave it and create other materials that use this bumped diffused shader. Going back to these shaders, these are the different ways that you can make the textures look in the game. If you want it to have different lighting effects and look reflective or shiny, that's what some of these different shaders can do. They're preset into Unity. So something like this kind of looks like it's radioactive or neon. I'm just going to go back to diffuse, and that will give me back to my main texture. If you want to change the tint slightly, feel free to do that. You can go into the main color. Maybe I want it to be a red grass, kind of gives it a different effect. Maybe just a slight red shade. Or there's different ways to definitely program it so it changes colors as well. Be kind of trippy, but it would work as well. Maybe I want my grass to be super green, take out the dead grass so I can change my main color. Go back to white. Black is obviously not seen. So go ahead and change the textures to what you like. If you don't think you can create something that you would like, feel free to go up into Window and then the Asset Store. And when you open up the Asset Store, you can actually search for already created materials and textures. Be aware that some of these things you do need to buy, but since we are using this basically for education and just to get some experience under our belt and know what we're doing, we're not going to make any profit off of these games, so any of the ones that are free to use. When we come back, we will get into setting up our splash screen and level selection screen.